for me to be giving because I am not a visual processor at all. And the importance of visuals has been something that I have learned over 10 years of teaching. How many of my kids are visual processors? When I first learned about teaching with TPRS and comprehensible input, I was in my first year of teaching and I went to a Carol Gobb conference in Minneapolis. And I had only been teaching for one semester, but I could already tell that my students were only acquiring a little bit. They weren't going nearly as fast or as far as I thought they should. They were memorizing rules, they were memorizing lists of vocabulary, but they weren't actually becoming functionally fluent speakers in any way at all. And so when I went to Carol's conference, I remember sitting there thinking, this is how I want to teach. And she did a demo for us in Hebrew. And 9.5 years later, I can still remember so many of the Hebrew words from her story. It sticks with you. And so I began then experimenting in spring of that year, which was my first year of teaching, with just one class. And it was so powerful. The next year I tried it with all of my classes, and it was not as powerful. I struggled. I struggled with the more free-flowing TPRS environment. I struggled to know how far I should go. I struggled with classroom management. There's a really good panel on classroom management this afternoon that if you're new to this, I really encourage you to go to that. But I really believed that what Carol had shown us was incredible. And so I just kept chipping away at TPRS and CI. And you have moments where the magic comes together in your classroom and you're like, this is the potential of this method. All my kids are with me. They're all focused, they're laughing, they're having fun, they're in the target language, they're clearly processing. And then you have days where your story falls a little flat, or your humor doesn't really work. And the kids are just staring at you, and you remember like, okay, last week I felt the magic. It's possible. But I struggled through that, and I feel like it was 5 years before I became really even okay at TPRS. And it wasn't that I was failing all the time. It was before I saw sustained success in my classes. Now, there's a lot more professional development, a lot more support, the Facebook groups, the mentoring that's available now. If you're brand new to this, I wouldn't sit back and say it's going to be 5 years for me. But it may be an up and down process at the beginning, but it is so, so worth it in the end. So I just finished my 10th year of teaching, 9th full year with TPRS and comprehensible input. I would never ever look back. It was worth all of the struggle and the frustration and saying, I don't know if I'm really good at this. I don't know if my students are really getting this. Getting some pushback from kids. Now it's absolutely magical. And I'm going to go through a little bit in about 2 slides. I'm going to show you what the kids said. But like I said, this is kind of an odd presentation for me to be giving because I am mostly an auditory processor. So when I was in Carol's session 10 years ago, and she was presenting in Hebrew, that's how my brain really works. If you were to say to me, if you were to just say the word pine tree to me, what I would think of in my head is the sound of wind in pine needles. I would feel pine branches. I would smell a pine tree, and the very last thing that my brain pulls up is the image of a pine tree. And so I really totally jumped onto the TPRS bandwagon because this is how I learn. It's listening, it's processing auditory input, it's processing text, and for me, this is a huge strength. So it's like, of course this works. It took me a long time to figure out that many of my kids are much more visual than I am. And if we can incorporate images in with the power of the spoken TPRS, or the spoken comprehensible input, or the text, then suddenly we're pulling in some of those kids that were a little bit harder to reach before, or they're making connections in their brain that they weren't making before. And we're going to go through some of the ways that I use images in class. And like I said, this is hard for me. This is something I have to conscientiously do because my default is to just talk at them, or my default is to just story ask. My default is to have lots of spoken language, lots of written language, and not enough pictures. So we're going to go through some of the things that I've learned, but I just want to, this kind of piggybacks really nicely on what Grant was saying at lunch. I polled my 3rd grade students, so I'm currently teaching elementary, I have taught every level. So I've taught preschool, elementary, middle school, high school, and I also spent some time in Peru teaching at a university in Lima in Spanish. I was teaching advanced linguistics courses. So I've done a little bit of everything. I'm currently teaching preschool and elementary. And at the end of this school year, it was about in April, when I found out that I was coming here, and I'll also be presenting at the IFLT conference in Tennessee. When I found out that I was going to be doing both of these conferences, I asked my third graders, what do you like about learning with stories? And because the main focus of this is pictures, but because this session is in the beginner track, I'm assuming that some of you are here pretty new to this concept of teaching. And I just want to show you what my students are saying. And these are 8 and 9-year-old kids. They were unscripted, unprompted. I just said, we're going to switch into English. We're going to do something a little bit different today at the beginning of class. And I want to know what you like about learning with stories. And I was absolutely astonished by what they came up with, because their talking points, or their things that they said they liked about stories, are exactly the talking points that we use in the TPRS and CI community to say why this method works. And my 8-year-olds could tell me why. So here's some of the things, and you'll see some pretty 8-year-old comments on here. We get to participate a lot. We go at just the right pace. It's not too slow and not too fast. When an 8-year-old said that to me, I was shocked. We're learning a lot, but we don't even realize that we're learning. This class is really animated. We like that you base the stories on things that are interesting to us, like Star Wars. I like the costumes and props, especially the masks, with all of my students, regardless of level and regardless of age. I've always used a lot of costumes. My room is full of foam masks and different props that they can use, and they love it. Some of our stories are realistic and some of them are silly. Now this is where I kind of diverge a little bit from your traditional TPRS, bizarre, exaggerated, and personal. I do some serious stories with them, and I do some more culturally focused stories. So I do a mix of really silly, a little bit silly, and really serious. And then I like it when the characters in the stories have our names, so much buy-in. You have to be a little careful with this. I never have a negative character that has a student's name, but they love when we switch it up and instead of like the dog, instead it's Samuel or something like that. They absolutely love it. And this was one of my 8-year-olds. If you don't teach us stories, you better keep one eye open while you sleep at night. So our image is necessary, and this is a big discussion in the TPRS community. I was at a brain conference a couple years ago in Dallas, and it used to be that when you picked up a TPRS book, there were often sort of like panels of pictures after each story, where the kids could go through the sequence of the events in the story and retell it in the target language. And I was noticing as I was paging through Blaine's more recent stuff that's not in there anymore. And I don't remember if it was me or if it was someone else who asked, I don't see those story panels anymore or the story sequences. And he said, oh yeah, we've kind of moved away from that. So there's been a shift actually away from images in the TPRS community. And I think we sometimes need to bring it back. And we need to bring it back to some really basic things. Now, there's a lot of information online that says approximately 65% of the population are visual learners. I tried to find this study and I couldn't. I found a lot of people cross-referencing each other. So I don't know if this is true. I found some places that said 80% of people are visual learners. All I know is that in my own, so take this with a grain of salt, but in my own teaching, I have found that my kids respond incredibly well to visuals, that they stick in their brain better. And that's my very non-scientific observation of many kids of many different ages. There is an emotional connection or some kind of a brain connection to those pictures, so that if I put a picture with a story and I come back to that story, or I come back to that picture, I just flash it up on the board, 3 months later, the kids will remember that character's name, they'll remember the story that went with that character, and suddenly you have an incredible amount of review, and you can do it in the past tense, because it's like remember when. So maybe we told the story the first time in the present tense. Now I'm going to put that picture up and we're going to say, oh, last week, what did that character do? Where did they go? What did they accomplish there? What was their problem? And all of a sudden, you're very, very naturally getting repetitions of all those verbs again in the past tense. And if you, like many other CI teachers, don't believe in going sequentially through tenses, many of us mix our tenses from the very beginning. Suddenly, that's an incredibly natural way to mix your tenses, because you've told it the first time in the present tense. The dog goes here, his leg hurts, he has this problem, and then a week later you put that same image up, and you can say, remember this dog, what was his name? What color was he? Where did he go? And so that to me is the power of, it's a lot different for me to go back to a story if I don't have an image that goes with it. And it's still possible, and many people do it. Grant does it, you'll say, oh, remember this story that we told last week? But there's a different reaction in my class when I put the picture up. One of the problems in using pictures, and Carol mentioned this morning, that you should try everything for 5 days. And I probably have tried everything that I've come across in 10 years of teaching, just constantly trying to get better. And I'm still working on getting better. And I think if you talk to Grant, he'll tell you the same thing. We're from the same area, so we connect a bit. And we'll talk about the same thing of we're constantly learning. I feel like I'm constantly growing as a TPRS and CI teacher. So in a way it feels odd to be up in front of you, because I'm constantly growing and developing my own craft, and I feel like we never stop. And but one of the things that I tried, so Carol said try everything for at least 5 days, and I think I've probably done that. I've tried some really awful things for 5 days. Tried some really great things that I keep doing. But one of the things I did try for a while was this idea of total immersion, of never having English in the classroom at all. And what I found is I actually had kids who would whisper to each other, it feels like we're playing charades. And I would be like, English, and it's, that it was very unnatural. I don't speak English very much with my classes. With my third graders, I'm on a normal day about 98% in the target language. And, but I do a lot of writing up the Spanish and writing the English next to it. So I'm not necessarily speaking in the target language, or in English, I'm speaking in the target language, but not in English. But it's up here for them to refer back to. Here's one structure and then the English equivalent, and another structure and the English equivalent. And I don't think of that as translating, I think of that as establishing meaning. Because otherwise, I think many of us have seen this in our classroom, you lose them. And your high flyers are with you, but you've got part of the class that's stuck trying to figure out what that word is, and they haven't heard the other 10 sentences that you've said because they're still trying to figure out that word. And then you've got another group that thinks they understand it, but they understand it wrong. And so then you can have a lot of confusion later. And this is an example. When I did my master's degree, I did it in linguistics. And I did my research on a tonal language, so if anybody likes Chinese, I did my research on a tonal language that's spoken in the Amazon basin, Colombia and Peru. If I just pointed to this, and this is the word for what the concept that I'm trying to get across, I'm going to give you, in just 1 second, I'm going to give you 30 seconds to look at a partner and figure out what it is that this means in English. And the word is nave. Nave. Look at someone near you. You have 30 seconds to figure out what nave means in English.
So I think it's this is in Spanish.
So what did we come up with? You shout it out.
Waterfall.
Waterfall. Anything else?
Cool. Nature.
Cool. Nature.
Beauty.
I deliberately made this tricky.
Oh.
It actually means photograph.
Oh.
So I made it tricky on purpose, but to be honest, there are things that I have done in my classroom that I have thought were crystal clear, that then a week later, I have a kid that's like, well, that means such and such, right? Yes.
I took over as a long-term sub in the middle of the semester at a high school, and they gave me all 5 second-year Spanish classes plus 1 first-year Spanish class. I discovered I had 150 second-year students who did not know what the word usted meant. They thought it was the formal form of he and she,
Wow.
That makes
because nobody
And
translated.
ella, usted,
Nobody translated. I mean, they heard it, first year Spanish, and then for the rest of the time with no they never did translation. And so they misunderstood it, because what's the chart look like in the book?
Yeah, that makes so much sense, and I have had, and I can't think of an example off the top of my head, because it's been quite a few years since I was doing that immersion style, like my second year of teaching, I think. And so it's been a while, but I did have some things where kids would say something and I would go, oh my goodness, that's 4 months of repetition, where you thought that this was this. So for me, the most important first step in teaching any new word or any new structure is establishing that meaning in English. And there's been a lot of ink spilled about this, and there's a lot of strong opinions on both sides, but having seen that misunderstanding over and over again when I was trying to do this, I firmly believe in having it on the board, and I rarely say it in English. A lot of times it's just written up here. Now for my really little ones, now that I'm teaching elementary school, then I will say it, and usually have some kind of visual to go along with it for them. But I really believe, especially for, once you get to where your kids are really literate, having it up here in the target language and in English is so helpful for them. And you'll watch, their eyes will go over 15 or 20 times during the class. Kids I never expected, high flyers, kids who really seem to get it, their eyes are going over there just to double check and make sure. And it's a really powerful tool. So we're going to talk today about some ways to use images in class. There's a couple of ways that I use them. I use them as a hook, especially when I taught middle school. I would often have some crazy image on the board when the kids came in as a hook to draw them into the lesson. It had something to do with the structures that we were learning that day. And I didn't do it every day. I usually did it about once a week. And you can kind of find your balance. Picture talk, if you've heard of movie talk, picture talk is really similar to movie talk. It's basically story asking strategies applied to a picture. If you are new to TPRS and stories, this is a wonderful scaffold to get you where you really feel comfortable story asking. That said, I do this a lot, so it's not just a stepping ladder. It's a really powerful tool in your toolbox of comprehensible input strategies. And then stories, so you can use this as a launch pad for a story. My elementary kids would love this picture. We would get great stories out of this one. You can use a picture as a plot twist, and this is really fun in novice level classes, where you want to add that touch of humor, but your kids maybe know 30 words in the target language. You can put a picture up. I'm going to show you an example that was one of my students' favorites in just a couple of slides. You can put a picture up, and suddenly you've twisted that story all on its head without having to use the target language, and you can use a really simple sentence to move forward from there. Maybe you have someone tumbling off of a cliff, and then you say, Paco was sad, and you can say that, and suddenly that piece of the story has been provided by the picture, and you can use that to scaffold, and then use really simple language for the rest of the story, and I do that a lot with my elementary students. Humor. Kids will naturally add a lot of humor to a comprehensible input or TPRS classroom. They're bursting with it. But if you want to just make sure, especially for me on those days in Minnesota in January and February when everyone's a little bit tired, and the kids are sometimes coming in half asleep, if I can add a humorous picture to the story, that really helps. You can also use pictures to expand the world of your story. We're going to go through that with some examples. And then you can use them to show something about the target culture, and that can be either in a story or just in a class discussion, like Grant showed so beautifully before with the picture of the kids playing football. And it's a great way to show something that's relevant to the kids, and then also teaches them about something in the culture. And then if we have time, and I don't know if we will, we got started a little late, we'll talk about parallel stories, and then just really briefly how to use pictures as a memory refresher. So you can use pictures, like I said, to hook the students into your lesson. Choosing pictures that relate to the targeted structure that you want to teach. Maybe what you want to wanna teach on this particular day is that someone is sad, or that these people are together, or that they're going out together, or that he looks or he watches. There's so many different ways that you can use an image like this. If I had an image like this on the board when my 8th graders came in, they would instantly sit down and start to talk about it, you know, what it might mean. And so it was really fun. Some teachers, and I've only recently started working at a school that had a color printer, so I've been kind of limited to black and white for most of my teaching career. But teachers who have access to a color printer, I've heard of some teachers who actually have a bulletin board where they have a picture of the week, and they'll rotate that out. And they'll have one area on the bulletin board for each level that they're teaching, and then as the kids are coming in, they look at that bulletin board with the picture of the week, and they know that there's gonna be something special with that, say on Friday, if they have time. And that can be really great to get them kind of talking about, you know, what that story might be, or what that activity might be, or what you might be doing with the picture. So that's really fun if you have a color printer and space to do it. You can teach something about culture. This was always really popular with my 8th grade students. I would just put this up, and then I would have them do their bell work or whatever they did at the beginning, and I wouldn't really say anything about this for a while until a student would be like, "How do you say guinea pig?" And it was really fun. And this is from a cathedral in Lima, Peru. So it's the Last Supper, but of course what you would serve your most honored guest is guinea pig. And so Jesus has the guinea pig right there in front of him. And I've used this in public school. It's never been an issue because it's culture. So then you have your nice little plate of guinea pig zoomed in for them to you know, have an idea. And it opens up a really great, wonderful parallel discussion of what do we serve honored guests? What would you serve someone if they were at your house? What do you like to eat? And so you can pull in that personalization along with something that's very cultural. You can do an optical illusion. This was really fun. My kids really like this. Every couple weeks in my 8th grade class, I would have something up there that would just mess with their brains a little bit. And it was just a great way to have a 2 or 3 minute discussion in Spanish at the very beginning. You know, lots and lots of input, and just kind of some fun things for them. So I tried to change up the kinds of images that I was hooking them into the lesson with fairly frequently. So it can be a static image or it can be animated. And I was homeschooled, so I did not get to play sports. So sports are an area where I struggle to connect with my students. I don't have that experience. So if I can put something up like this, or if I can put an amazing kick in soccer, or I can put any kind of image that will let me kind of cheat on the sports part, it's really good for me. And I've been able to do that with anything that the kids were interested that I was not interested in. You know, an image from a video game, or, you know, something like that, and suddenly you've got your kids really pulled in, and they're talking about their interest, or, you know, I really like to play baseball, or, you know, this kind of thing, and it bridges the fact that I don't naturally start those conversations in any language, because it's not my area of expertise. But if I can put this up there, suddenly the class is talking, and we've gotten over that awkward bit of like the fact that I really don't very little about sports, and I can have the kids then teaching me more, and it's really easy for me to circle structures here. It's really easy for me to talk about this, and the kids leave thinking that I'm interested in baseball, which and you can do all kinds of different things. This is just more culture. It's the Panama Canal, and so you can do something like this, time-lapse image of that, and that's just really fun. So you can do all sorts of things. You can also do some that are just silly. So this is great for teaching helps, or you know, work together, or a swimming pool, or ball, or whatever it is that you might want, and it gets a laugh out of the kids. And once again, it's a great thing to pull out on those days when your class seems like they're dragging a little bit more. You hit that kind of hump in the middle of the year, and these can be wonderful ways to pull your students in. Story asking, so picture talk is story asking skills applied to a picture, and some of you have probably done movie talk before, which is where you you go through a movie and every couple seconds or 20 or 30 seconds you stop and you ask questions about that movie. Picture talk is the same thing but applied to a picture. And these pictures can be silly, and we'll go through some that are silly. They can also be serious, and this is where, like I said, I diverge from some TPRS teachers. I like having discussions about more serious things with my students, and so this is not going to be a lighthearted story if we talk about this. In fact, I probably wouldn't turn a picture like this into a story at all. I would more have it be comprehensible input, describing the picture, asking questions about the picture, making personal connections. But I wouldn't have this go into a story because I would be afraid that it would become a little bit irreverent. And so I will do serious things as more of, this is my input as a discussion, and we're describing together, and I'm using all those same things. I'm using circling, I'm using something that Blaine Ray calls parking, which we'll get into in just a couple minutes, where you go through every single question word, you try to hit multiple types of question words. Personalized questions and answers, and then for a picture like this, I probably would skip the story asking stuff, because we've already gotten a lot of input in with just describing the picture together as a class. So circling, people do this all different ways, and circling, as you become more comfortable with it, I don't go in this order anymore. I kind of pick and choose and mix things up, but the general order of circling that you would see, say, on Blaine Ray's website is a statement. So something like, the man lives on the street. That's your statement. And then you would say, you would ask a question with a yes answer. So does the man live on the street? So we've had our statement, the man lives on the street. Does the man live on the street? Does the man live on the street? Or does he live in a house? Does he live on the street or does he live in a house? Right, he lives on the street, he does not live in a house. And this I was really bad at for a while. I would just say, yes, he lives on the street, but it's equally important for them to hear the negative sentences in Spanish. So I would say, yes, he lives on the street, he does not live in a house. And then you move on to a question with a no answer. Does he live in a house? No. He lives on the street, he does not live in a house. And like I said, now I might not go exactly like that. I might have the no one up here. I always start with a statement, but then the order of these you can really change up as you want to. Like the power is in the repetition. And so here's just an example of what I just said. So something that Blaine Ray calls parking that's not talked about a lot, but a lot of us do it, is going through multiple kinds of questions. So you're going to ask a who question, what, when, where, why, how many, and which. And you may not get through all of them. I get through as many as I can before I either run out of inspiration for that picture or I feel like my kids are wiggling a little bit too much, especially my smaller ones. As soon as one kid starts to wiggle, I'm instantly moving on to something else. And with older kids, it's a little bit easier to get through all of them, but I mean, just scan your room. If you feel like you're losing them, then switch it up. So you can do all sorts of things that will lay the foundation for an amazing story in the target language if you're just going through this. Who is this girl? You know, what's her name? What is she doing? And the kids will all of a sudden start feeding you all of these things that you can build into a story. When was this? Where is she? Why is she there? Why is she sad? Or is she sad? What is that expression on her face? What made her what made her sad? And you can go through all of those things with your kids, and this can easily take an entire class period. And it can easily take more than one if you're really listening to all those details that your students give you, and then you can spin a story from all of those things. And one of the things that that Grant does that I have now borrowed for my classroom is he has he calls it the copista, who is kind of like the class secretary who writes down all of those details in a notebook for their class. And that means that the next day before that class comes in that 2 minutes between classes, I can just pick up that notebook, scan really quickly, refresh my memory on where we went with that picture yesterday. And honestly, it doesn't matter if I don't remember because the kids will correct me. Like, no, her name is not Sandra, it's Gloria. Right, and so that can actually be great for extra repetitions, and I'm like, and she's sad because her boyfriend left her. The kids are like, no, she's sad because her dog died, and so there's those things that the kids are fine with correcting you, but I feel more about things if I know exactly kind of what's going on, and so that's really helpful to have a secretary. That job rotates in my class. And there's many resources for class jobs on Grant's website and on Bryce Hedstrom's website, and probably others. Those are the ones that I have looked at the most. And I have jobs for every single kid in my classroom because I have little ones. If I had older ones, I wouldn't need it for every child, but little ones like to have a job for everyone, and those jobs rotate. And that's really powerful for them, and everyone gets a chance then to be the person who writes this down, and it's incredibly helpful for me. So personalized questions and answers can take many, many different forms, but here's kind of a general example. So we might be talking about pets, and I might look at a student and say, oh, do you have a pet? Is it a dog? And then they might say no, and so I would say, oh, Sam doesn't have a dog. Is it a cat? Oh, he doesn't have a cat. Is it a bird? Oh, he has a bird. And then you can draw some wonderful parallels between that student and either the character in your story, who has a tiger, or you can draw parallels between another student that you've already asked. And so you can say, oh, Ava has a cat, but Sam has a bird. And who has a cat? That's right, Sam has a cat. Or Sam doesn't have a cat, Ava has a cat, and that happens in class too. And you can go through that with students, and it really gets a lot of buy-in. And as Grant was saying before, I encourage my kids to use their imagination, and it always takes a little while for me to really convince them that that's okay. So it's like the first 3 or 4 weeks, and you start to kind of see a little glimmer of excitement in some kids' eyes as they realize, I can do whatever I want. I can say I'm a pet unicorn. And as the year goes on, their answers get sillier and sillier and sillier, and I'm so excited to see them use their imagination. I don't need to know if Ava actually has a cat. If Ava says that she has a dragon, that's awesome. Ava can have a dragon. Maybe she has a big, green dragon that breathes fire. That's wonderful. And so I definitely encourage them to use their imagination. Once again, my personalized questions and answers in this context are building off of a picture. You can build them off of anything, but it's incredibly powerful for me to build them off of a picture. So we have story asking. I think there we go. We have so the story asking, the foundation for my story is my circling questions, followed by those parking questions, the different question words. And personalized questions and answers. And I will often mix all of these together. So I'm going to ask some circling questions, then I'm going to ask some parking questions, and I might switch back into circling, or I might throw some personalized questions and answers in there. The more comfortable you get with these skills, the more you can treat it like, just a tossed salad. And, I might ask 2 personal questions and then go back and circle a little bit if I see that some kids were a little bit confused about what that word meant or something. And so you can really do this in many, many different orders. And if you're starting out, it can be really helpful to write yourself a circling script, and then a parking script, and then a personalized questions and answers script, so that you kind of figure out, maybe make some notes for yourself about what your timing was like. But as you get really comfortable, you can really start to mix them up, and that's really helpful, especially, like I said, for teaching younger students. You have to be really quick to respond when they are wiggly, and so moving around a little bit is helpful. So you can use your images as a launch pad for a story, as we just talked about with Picture Talk. So Picture Talk can launch a story. If you put up a picture like this, and this is wonderful if you are in a school that requires you to teach a certain set of vocabulary by the end of the year. Some people, have the luxury of getting to choose and just kind of go with the flow of what their students want. Other people are a little bit more constrained, in what their school wants them to teach. You can start out with a picture like this. Maybe you are required to teach, fork and knife and plate, and you can suddenly very naturally get the kids interested in that without giving them like their restaurant vocabulary list. You can suddenly have the kids really interested in creating a story about this And you're almost guaranteed to get fork and knife and plate in there somewhere. And you can get lots of reps with those. And that's really helpful. I have taught in both kinds of environments, where I've had a certain set of words that I had to teach by the end of the year, and where I've been a lot more free in what I can do. And when I have been a little bit more bound to the expectations of a department, this has been a really great way of maintaining student interest, still getting them to use their creativity and imagination, and really make the story their own, but within these certain parameters. Yes.
I can actually see taking a structure that you have to teach and entering it into Google image search, just see the images that come up that would go along with that structure that
That's
you
a
have to teach.
fabulous idea. So once again, you're going to establish meaning first. So you are going to have your structures that you want to teach that day. And my kids are really smart now. They come in and they see the structures on the board, because I usually have them on there, and they're like, oh, if there's airplane in there, and I'm like, how does the man travel? Then usually there's kind of like a wink, wink, oh, by airplane, because they can see those structures. They're like, she's gonna get us here eventually. I might as well just shorten the process. My 8th graders really got a laugh out of that. They really would play along really well when they would see, that this is kind of what I wanted to hit. And if you have good rapport with your kids, they know if you are in, if you do have goals, some people will more freewheel it, in class, and they might not, they just kind of let things come up as they come up. But if you have targeted structures for that day, and you have them on the board, and you build that strong classroom community with your kids, they'll play along with you. And like I said, it became kind of a joke with my 8th graders that they were pretty sure where our story was going. But you establish meaning first, then circling, parking, personalized questions and answers, building those into your story. And I'll stop in the story and do these as well. So it's not just this and then story. I'll, within a story, stop for a minute to circle, stop to ask some parking questions, stop to ask some personalized questions and answers, and it keeps my students motivated and engaged throughout the entire story. So there's just, endless pictures that you can use. This has been popular. This is great. So many story options for something like this. You can do more of a serious one, and then you can do, one of my favorite things to do is occasionally do artwork. So this is Velázquez, and it's really fun to build a story, and it can be as silly of a story as you want, but build a story around a classic artwork. And we do a lot with Picasso in our elementary. We do a lot with colors, and Picasso will do some story building around some Picasso images. And this is another amazing thing. Here, there's so many ways you could go with a story here. This is another, classic piece of art from Spain. And so you can just go through with your artwork, and once in a while throw one of those in, and then say, oh, and by the way, this is who painted this, and kind of go on from there, incorporate a little bit of that in. But you can absolutely use these as a launch pad. As you get up into more advanced classes, it's really fun to ask the students some more sensory questions. Like you might, if they were actually writing, say, a creative short story on something, what does it smell like? That's a word, smell is a word that I rarely incorporate in my class as much as I should. It's such a common word. And so what does it smell like? What does it look like? What does it feel like? And all of those are really, really fun to incorporate into more advanced classes as well. And there's so many images out there that can be amazing launch pads for stories. So our next thing is a plot twist. It's one thing to say, and you can get a lot of mileage if you're using your voice, and be like, actually, this squirrel is. And you can get a lot of mileage out of that just with your voice. If you have a picture of a Superman squirrel, that has just that much more of an impact. Or the car is actually a banana, and if you have an image up there to go along with it, there's just such a more powerful punch for our kids. And it's, like I said, you can do this with or without images. I do a balance, but when I do it with the images, it is really powerful. Humor. Audubon Charter School, enormous classes, 26 kindergartners in a room for an hour. And so you have mostly refugee students. We were over 95% refugee students. The kids were taking 2 languages on an A/B schedule. So most of my kids were thinking in English, Somali, Arabic, and Spanish, and which was amazing, but presented a few challenges. And one of the things that I did with them is I got them started in stories with lots of picture support. And this image I used, I think around week 5 or 6 of school. So they had me every other day. And I wanted to tell a story that would pull them in, it would engage them, but they didn't have that much Spanish yet. So my story went kind of like, there's a family, and the family has, you know, a mom, a dad, a brother, and a baby, or something like that. And then the family has a cat and a dog. Are the cat and the dog friends? Nope, they're not friends. They have a cat and a fish. Are the cat and the fish friends? No, the cat and the fish are not friends. The cat wants to eat the fish. And so you go through the story of the cat watching the fish. Then the cat jumps, and I didn't actually have to say what happened here. They could just see, we got that humor in, they were laughing, and then I could just say, the cat says, hiss, and the cat jumps. And so this really crucial part of the story for them to have that laughter and that engagement to pull them in, that was actually not said in the target language. I was keeping the target language really simple for them. They were week 6 of learning Spanish, limited vocabulary, about 25, 30 words. But I could tell an engaging story for them. And what I do with my elementary students is when I create stories with pictures, I actually print them out and put them in my classroom library. And this was the most popular story in my classroom library for the whole year. The kids would fight. I had to print extra copies because the kids would fight over who got to read the story. So simple. I had a colleague use this with middle school students. Use that same story, and she said her 8th graders couldn't get enough of it. They wrote sequels to it. And just the power of this image, it wasn't the story itself. It was an incredibly simple story, but it engaged them in the target language. It had that humor aspect to it. It had the element of surprise, which many good stories do, and it was incredibly powerful. So you can also use images to expand the world of your story. So these are the cave houses in Granada in Spain. If I start a story with there is a house, and I put up this cave house, that's one story, right? And my students can take it from there. If I say there is a house, and I put up this picture, suddenly we have a completely different story. And I often will put images up just as backdrops for when my students are acting out the story, when I have my student actors up in front. I'll have something like a scary forest or a swamp or something like that behind them. And it just helps kind of maneuver the story, because you're kind of the story director. I usually have a spot that I want the story to go, and the more I can just kind of make the students think that was their idea, the more ownership that they have of it. So if I start and I say there's a house and I point at this, suddenly they're going in that scary direction that I wanted our story to go. And now we're going to have the structure is afraid, there's a light in the window, it's dark, all of those things that I might want to hit on that particular day just because I put this image up. And that's where we're going with our story. You can also show something about the target culture. I love to surprise my students. This is a ballerina practicing on the streets of Cuba. Ballet is not what my students typically associate with Cuba. I interned in Mexico in college, and actually the daughter of the director of our program was studying ballet in Cuba, which was surprising to me. I didn't realize that they had one of the 3 top ballet schools in the world. And so that is fun for me to show them as well. We'll talk about where is this, and Cuba never comes up as a place where they think this ballet dancer would be practicing. And so that's really fun. Not as much with the younger ones, but by the time we've gotten to like 8th or 9th grade, this can be really eye-opening for them. That wow, that's Cuba. The same thing if we're talking about somebody drinking a soda. I like to show an image like this, and I'll often just mute my projector and quickly do a search. So this is not maybe something, maybe the kids have come up with the idea that, oh, now he's drinking, Coca-Cola. And I'll just quickly search that, and suddenly that can become part of our story where I'm like, oh, and it's a Coca-Cola in a bag, because that's what you would do in Mexico if you didn't want to pay for the glass bottle. And suddenly I've just gotten that snippet of really relevant culture in, and I'll probably leave this up for most of the rest of class so that they can refer back to it in our story. And that's a really great way of bringing in relevant bits of culture and to just kind of like turning their expectations a little bit on their head, where it's like, well, but he wouldn't be drinking it out of a bottle if you were in Mexico. And so that's really fun. I just did a monarch butterfly units with my third graders, and they were totally surprised, even in third grade, to find that this kind of landscape exists in Mexico. And that this is a butterfly sanctuary where the monarchs go, that there are spruce trees there was absolutely shocking to them. And so just that bit of surprise where it's like, oh, now today we're going to talk about butterflies. Where is this? And they're like, oh, Minnesota. So no, Canada, no, it's not there either. And when I say Mexico, their concept of Mexico is that it's desert and beaches, right? And now suddenly you just widen that lens a little bit in a way that if I just said to them, there's a butterfly and it goes to Mexico, they might be thinking, oh, it's hanging out on a cactus, you know? And so as we were doing our story about our little butterfly and its migration down to Mexico, suddenly there's a real concept of where that butterfly is heading. We're running out of time, so really quickly, telling parallel stories. I love giving my students a broad lens into what a culture looks like. All of these houses are found in Peru. And my students will often think, well, Peru might look like this, or Peru might look like this. But the idea that all of these coexist within a single country, so if we're talking about houses, and we're talking about what kind of a house does this character live in, or just talking in general, what kind of a house does, what kind of a house do people live in Peru? Suddenly I can put up something like this, and if you've watched that TED Talk, The Danger of a Single Story, I have a link to it in the presentation because I think it's so good. I am always concerned that I'm telling my students a single story about Latin American cultures. And there are so many and they are so broad. And what I want to do as much as possible is weave multiple strands into their understanding of what Latin American culture is like. Having lived in Peru, I understand all of these angles of Peru. My students may not. And they say that a picture is worth 1,000 words. When our kids don't have 1,000 words in the target language, this is how we communicate this to them. And then we can take their several hundred words and build comprehensible input from there. Or if they are more advanced, we can build on their several thousand words and make it even more powerful with a picture. So that's why I use images in my classroom. And on the presentation, which there should be a link on the website, not sure if it's up yet, but there will be eventually on the very last page, I have a link to many of the places where I find images. Always have to be a little bit mindful, of copyrights and different things. So just be aware. There's many children's book illustrators who have portfolios online where people can look through their portfolio of children's picture book images and decide if they want them to illustrate their book or not. I have no idea what the copyright is on those. What I usually do in my own classroom is just insert a link into my presentation and then go to the actual page from that link. And that's actually, since I'm not sure of the copyright on all of these images, when you get the presentation, if you download it, all of the pictures are links in there to the actual source. So that you can use it if you want to, and just to be really mindful of that copyright. So there's many more places. I often will just do a Google image search, but this will get you started in exploring. And thank you so much for coming.